Preston McLaughlin, PAG RTA Mobility Manager.
Mary Barish, second co-chair.
Rick Ellis with PAG RTA.
Melanie Lawson with PAG RTA.
And I'm Michael Ortega, Executive Director of RTA.
All right, thanks, everybody. We just had a
Romero, CAC.
Dr. Romero. Good to have you. All right, I'm just going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Ortega, who is going to fill us in on things and has some messages for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I really appreciate everybody showing up today, and we wanted to give you a couple of thoughts. The first is to say thank you for the energy and effort you all put forth, as Tom mentioned in his opening remarks, for years. I believe it was about 5, maybe 6 years.
7.5.
7.5 to be exact.
Who's counting?
But who's counting? And when he said he wasn't sure, he remembered how to do this, like riding a bicycle, right, Tom? You can get to it. So, you know, it's hard when you go through and you're right in the thick of trying to develop a plan or really any project. And there's a lot of emotion, a lot of passion that goes into that. But the one thing that I think we didn't do very well was say thank you. Thank you for the energy and effort that you put forth. And one of the things that I've observed is a lot of people care about Tucson. They care about the region. And it's important that we acknowledge the energy and effort that's put forth. And that's really the first item on the agenda today, was really to just say thank you to all of you for the energy and effort you put forth. Hopefully you will be able to take the little box that's there. It's just a small token of our appreciation that really expresses, again, our thanks, and that's on behalf of the board and also on behalf of the staff. So what today will look like is we will go over the RTA Next plan that was approved or adopted by the board and answer any questions that you might have. We'll get into as much detail as you'd like. The presentation that you see today is pretty much what we are showing folks around the county. Our goal is to present this plan to about 200 organizations between now and March 10th. I can tell you that our real focus will be through February 11th, which is when the ballots will go out in the mail. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the staff. I think Melanie Lawson is going to drive the presentation to PowerPoint, and then we'll certainly answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to thank Tom and Carolyn and Mary for, I know some of them urged you to come here in person. And so I appreciate their follow-up. And again, we just really appreciate everyone being here in person. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. And as our executive director mentioned, we will have plenty of time for questions, and we'll tag in other staff as needed to support that. So I'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start by covering the plan elements, and this is just a high-level overview of what elements are in the RTA Next plan. So it's a proposed $2.7 billion plan with these 5 key elements: the roadway element, safety, ADA, and active transportation; the new element that was added, arterial and collector roads, which was largely in response to feedback we received during the public engagement that we did last fall and last winter. We heard a lot of feedback about the condition of the pavement, and so that was an added element. The environmental element, and then the transit element. In the roadway element, there are also 7 projects from the current RTA that are moved into RTA Next that needed scope revisions or additional funding to complete those projects. So those are listed under the roadway element. We also passed out copies of the plan, and if you for some reason didn't get a copy, I have some more over on the back over there. The map also that you received is just the roadway element. The other elements are difficult to map because they haven't been fully defined yet, but what is on the map are all of the roadway projects, and then the number corresponds to what's on the plan. There it goes. So this is a breakdown of the budget by percentage. So you can see that the roadway element is about 43% of the plan. The 2006 RTA completion, those 7 projects that we talked about, are about 10% of the plan. Safety, ADA, and active transportation, 9%. The new element of pavement rehabilitation, 7%, 2% for environmental, and then transit is about 27%. So we like to remind the people of the benefits of the RTA. We oftentimes hear that people don't know who the RTA is, and that's okay. You don't necessarily need to know who the RTA is, but when you remind people what the RTA has done, they often know a project or something in their neighborhood that was completed, something they drive on to get to work, that was made possible by the RTA. And it links to getting people where they need to go for essential services. The paratransit service connects people to medical appointments or other life-saving care. It gets people to work, to recreation. It lets you move throughout the community and all across Pima County. And we like to get into the funding breakdown to remind people how significant the RTA portion is. So the RTA funding brings in about 2/3 of funding for the region, or about 126 million annually. So you can see on the screen, the state and federal funding sources combined are about 50 million, which is only about 1/3 that comes into the region. And the RTA funding is more versatile in that it can be used for not just roadway projects, but the transit, the environmental, and all of those other elements that we mentioned. And it's not restrictive just to roadway, which can be sometimes what happens with state and federal funding. So it's a more versatile funding source. It can be used to leverage for federal grants or other grant funding as well. When we're talking with the public about this, we ask people to think about their own personal situation and if you lost 2/3 of your income overnight. So without RTA funding, 2/3 of the funding could go away. Some difficult decisions would need to be made. For example, transit alone, the RTA provides about $30 million annually to support transit. And if that funding source weren't available, the jurisdictions would need to come up with another funding source. An economic development study was also commissioned and looked at the previous RTA and the economic impact it had on the region. So with the 2006 RTA, more than 1,000 plan improvements were completed, and the RTA directly invested $1.6 billion into the region. That investment led to $3 billion in public-private investments. So we asked people to think about some specific projects such as the Twin Peaks interchange or the Houghton Road improvements, where those improvements led to businesses coming into the region, new stores, retail, automotive, sales coming into the region. And that's where that $3 billion in economic activity comes from. It also led to 40,000 permanent jobs that were created, and those are permanent jobs above and beyond the construction jobs that were created. And if those conditions remain the same, we can expect that with RTA Next as well. So an estimated 48,000 additional jobs could come with RTA Next and a 3.7 billion total economic benefit. So again, that looks not at just the transportation investment that's made, but the economic benefit from having retail or some of the other economic activity come in as a result of those transportation improvements. This study also looks out 35 years instead of 20 because it gives the projects that are completed in year 20, 15 years to get that economic activity to be realized. Now, without RTA Next, we could expect about 54,000 jobs to be lost, and that's a result of a lack of transportation infrastructure. Some companies might move to a different location, something that's more attractive. If they're taking a product to market and freight is difficult to move around the region, they might go to somewhere else that has better transportation infrastructure. So that's where that 54,000 job loss number comes from, and then resulting in 3.5 billion in economic loss. And we show this not to try to focus on the negative at all. It's about making people realize that without RTA, it's not status quo. Things won't continue as they're running currently. There would be potential gaps in service or something as regions look for additional funding to fill those gaps. It wouldn't be business as usual. So without RTA Next, everyday life could be affected. Transit riders would see a cut in services, particularly those people that use Dial-A-Ride or some of those other services in the outlying areas to get to the urban core for retail, employment, or medical appointments. Traffic congestion would also get worse. The commute time would increase. People might be sitting in traffic more often. And again, those vulnerable and outlying communities could be left behind with people in outlying areas not being able to connect to the transit system or other services. So we like to show this as what RTA has been able to provide over the last several years. This is mostly just the roadway projects. We do have maps online that show the safety improvements and bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So this is the base map showing the pre-2006 RTA network. The green line are the 2006 RTA projects that were completed. And then the blue is the RTA Next project. So you can see how everything connected and builds upon the previous 2006 RTA. The dotted line there is the Sonoran Corridor study. It's just a dashed line and not a solid because it is the study. It's not the construction of that roadway. So these are some transit maps. I'll let Preston talk through them.
Sure, yeah. So they're just a couple of maps that were generated that specifically show the services that the RTA provides through their own transit service, which is the Sun Shuttle. And so this first map is showing the expanded paratransit service area. So the service area for individuals who are eligible for paratransit with disabilities. And the area in blue is the total service area that Sun Shuttle ADA Dial-A-Ride provides. And this is not a federally required service area. This goes beyond what is required by the FTA. This was decided by the elected officials at the time. I think the power. Oh, one of the TVs went out. Sorry. I'll look over here. It was decided by the elected officials at the time to provide that additional service for residents in the outlying areas to be able to receive paratransit service, even if they don't live in the urban core. And this has been very well used. We're seeing, 100,000 plus trips a year just for our Dial-A-Ride services to bring residents from outside of the city into the city and into the city outside. And the area in the purplish red, that is the Sun Van service area. So that is the area that would still exist if if RTA Next does not pass. But the area in blue, that's the area that's in jeopardy of shrinking if there isn't sufficient funding to provide that paratransit service to the outlying areas.
And we're working on the final calculation, but we're looking at the number of households that this area covers, and it's over 80%, which is great.
Okay, and we can move to the second slide. And so this is just showing all the other Sun Shuttle public transit services that are available to everyone. This includes the Sun Shuttle fixed route services, as well as the public Dial-A-Ride services that are in Sahuarita and Green Valley, Marana-Aber Valley, and Oro Valley, and all the other fixed routes that go into the outlying areas of the greater Tucson region, as well as to Ajo. And we also, it's not included in this map, but there's also a public Dial-A-Ride service area in Ajo that's very well liked and used. So we are trying to reach the Western Pima County as well. So yeah, these are all of the Sun Shuttle services that are almost completely paid for with RTA dollars. There's also some federal grant funding that supplements the cost to operate these services. But this is where about $13 million annually in RTA funding goes to provide transit to these outlying areas that are not within the city of Tucson, but that connect residents to the city and makes the transit service regional. And I also wanted to note that this does not account for the transit services that the RTA provides funding for, excuse me, for SunTran. About 60% of the RTA transit budget goes to SunTran for their services to expand and enhance their transit services, whether that looks like expanded service hours or extended routes into other regions or increased frequency. So about $19 million annually goes to SunTran for those service enhancements. I'll leave it there.
Yep, and we can come back to these maps for questions once we're finished. So why count on the RTA? If you've been following along, you've likely gleaned that we learned from experience and the board did adopt a more conservative estimate for sales tax collections, one that does have a higher probability of success. And in addition, the Office of the State Auditor General will continue to provide mandated performance audits of the RTA every 5 years. And the RTA will spend the money as approved by voters within the expenditure limit for each element within the plan. And lately, this has been a big selling point for the public, is that it's locally controlled, voter controlled. There's not an outside entity that's controlling the funding source. It's what's approved by voters is what we can spend the money on. So we all are also reiterating that there is no tax increase. The current tax rate is a 1/2 cent. The tax rate with RTA Next would be a 1/2 cent as well, and there will also would not be any overlap. So the 1/2 cent sales tax, if approved by voters on March 10th, would end March 31st, and then the new sales tax collection would start on April 1st of 2026. So you're currently paying a 1/2 cent and you would pay a 1/2 cent for the next 20 years with RTA Next as well. So we like to remind people, no matter your destination, there should be something in RTA Next that you can see that will benefit you wherever you live or work in the region. It is a mix of mobility choices as well. There's transit, there's pedestrian, bike enhancements, roadway. And so there should be something in the plan. As you all probably know better than anybody, it's impossible to make a plan that everyone loves 100%. But there should be something in the plan that everybody can get behind. This QR code will get you to the project list, but we have copies of that as well. So with that, we can open it up for questions.
Sure.
As we get our TVs back.
Start off with Bruce.
So as I understand it, the element that was added after we finished our work at the CAC was the pavement program. I have a question about the methodology about how those funds would be distributed. Would they be distributed on a jurisdictional basis? Would they be distributed on the basis of what projects rise to the highest need, or some other methodology or formula for those allocations?
Mr. Chairman, Bruce, so first of all, the conversation from the survey and from a lot of the feedback we got from the jurisdictional members was the importance of that reconstruction. And so there were two components to that. One was it's not a maintenance, so we're not going to be out filling potholes. It'll be a reconstruction with a 10-year life. And I think that's important. The other piece is an expansion from just the arterials, or away from just the arterials, to also collectors. So those were two big pieces. Then what we did is we went through and allocated dollars based on the overall percentages for the entities. And so all of the entities, with the exception of the Pasquayaki tribe, received some RTA reconstruction money. The reason the Pasquayaki tribe did not was because they have a very significant project in the roadway element. And everybody else's percentages, if you will, were added to, based on I'm going to say approximately population.
Is there, at the jurisdictional level, do they have to meet certain criteria? In other words, some streets are going to be in worse repair than others. And is there a methodology for how you make that decision at the jurisdictional level?
So, Mr. Chairman, Bruce, the bottom line was we initially had poor or failing condition. And what we decided early on was let's not go to that level. Let's leave it to the jurisdiction to determine because their needs based on their overall plan, their overall maintenance plan or reconstruction plan would ultimately inform that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You may also be aware that I believe all of the jurisdictions have pavement rating systems in place and for the most part use those pretty much directly to determine priority for reconstruction especially. So my expectation, I guess, is that that's what they would continue to do. But it's a good question and one I think that voters will be interested in within their own jurisdiction, certainly. If you live in Oro Valley, how does Oro Valley plan to use that money and et cetera? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is just point out a few things on the project list. So this is actually the RTA plan, and I want to make sure everybody has a copy of that.
I do not.
Okay, well, they're at the end. We'll get you a copy of that. We don't usually put it up on the screen because the print's pretty small and it's hard to read, so it's easier just to give it to you and then have you follow along. But I want to point out a few things that I think are important, and particularly because I know these came up over the course of your 7.5 years. Is that right, Tom? 7.5 years. Yeah, but he was counting. Because I think that I wanted you to know where and how they might be built into this. So the first thing we did was, as you heard in the presentation, we really focused on the pessimistic revenue forecast. And when we looked at that, we said, okay, if it's got a 20 or 25% likelihood of that happening, that means it's 80% chance that it's not. It's going to be more than that. And so what I suggested to the board was let's build in a safety net there where if we get additional dollars, where would they go and how would they be distributed? And so each of the elements has a line at the very bottom that says potential additional revenue. And so if you look at the bottom, let me see if I can find a line here. Okay, so let's look at on the first, it'd be project 32 under the roadway element, just as an example. You'll see roadway corridor element potential additional revenue, and there's a number there. And so the idea, that's 162 million. So the idea, that's just one. The idea is that as dollars come in on an annual basis, we'll compare the projected revenue against the actual revenue. But there's also another factor there, which is also dissecting the cost as well. And so what we're working on now is the admin code and the policies that will actually analyze. We'll go through on an annual basis. We'll look at actual revenues against projected revenues, but we'll also compare that to cost. If there's excess, then we'll start shoring up some of those additional revenue line items, which then can be used to offset increases in cost over time. Now, best case scenario, within those elements, it could also expand the use or expand the services that are provided within those elements. That's the best case scenario. So that's number one I wanted to point out. Number two, that second column, well, it's actually what, fourth column, the one that says committed non-RTA dollars. I think it's important to look through that for a minute because when you see the pie chart, if you can put the pie chart, it actually shows the percentages of the RTA dollars. But if you add the next column as well, that committed non-RTA money, and you start looking at those dollars, it becomes very significant in terms of the leveraging and the additional dollars that are allocated to the program as a whole. So we'll go through these very quickly. So on the roadway element, that 237 million that's listed on that the first page, that's actually regional money that's been allocated. So that's a decision that was made by the board to put dollars from the region into those projects. And so when you see the completion of RTA 1 at 257 million, it's actually 257 million plus 237 million. And you can just go down the line with those. The other one that I wanted to point out, which I think is important, is the transit element. The transit element shows that if you go to the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4th page. You look at the transit element and you have 726 million that was allocated out of RTA. So those are the RTA next dollars. But then on top of that, you have 228 million. Now, in fairness, you should subtract out 70 because that's a potential grant for the high capacity transit improvement. So we're expecting 70 million in grant money. But that 158 million is maintenance of effort money. And so when you look at those dollars, that investment in transit, it's not just the 726 million, it's actually 726 million plus 158, which is that maintenance of effort. Because I don't count the 70 million from the Fed because we may or may not get that. We are committed, or we do understand we will get that 158 million. And so I wanted to point that out. So when you look at the total program and you start looking at RTA Next, it's 2.67 billion. That's what we have allocated, and that's the budget, if you will. But there's additional dollars, about $350 million of that potential additional revenue, should revenues come in greater or better than what we projected, and the additional dollars that I just outlined for you in that column, which is what we'll call the leverage. That's the additional money that we're getting and we're allocating towards the program as a whole. So I wanted to make sure we pointed that out, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Chris,
Question, that raises a question related to the column that says committed non-RTA dollars. So is the expenditure of the RTA dollars contingent upon those monies being spent, actually budgeted and ready for the project?
Chairman, it's actually the opposite. It's the RTA money is leveraged to get the committed non-RTA dollars.
So what if they don't do it?
They're committed if the RTA money comes through. They're not committed if the RTA money doesn't come through. I'm not sure I understood your question. Maybe I didn't answer it.
So the RTA, the voters approved this program. So the column that is committed only if it passes.
That's correct.
But the committed has to happen via other mechanisms, right? So what if that money doesn't come through for a variety of reasons? Does the project then not happen?
Great question. So let's use an example. So for example, let's go to the transit. That 70 million is what I would call probably the one that's in question, which is the federal grant. So on the transit element, that first line, the high capacity transit improvement, Tucson, there's 70 million that's allocated in RTA and 70 million from the Fed. Okay, so what we've suggested is if the 70 million doesn't come in from the Fed, there is still an opportunity to do high capacity transit, just not to the level that we would do with 140 million. So the project would still happen, but not necessarily in a configuration that's thought of today at 140 million.
Does that apply to every project that's listed?
I would say to you, yes. I would say to you, yes. However, if you look at, let's go back to the first page, which is that 237 million. So those are regional monies that come in now. Let's say for whatever reason, gas tax or surface transportation block money doesn't come in. So what we would do is go back to the board and say, we're going to have to allocate this for a longer period of time. So this column, if you will, that first page is 5 years of funding. And so what we would suggest is if it doesn't come in at 237 million, which by the way is a conservative estimate, but if it for whatever reason didn't hit, then I would suggest to them we're going to have to go farther, 6, 7, 8 years. You're welcome.
very good. Mel,
In the committed non-RTA money, is any of that the new reality subject to the whims of the federal government?
Chairman, I guess I could say all of it. But really and truly, I would suggest to you that 70 million in transit is probably the one that makes me, pause. quite frankly. I think the rest of it is pretty well identified. We've got development impact fees. We have other sources that are not necessarily a function of federal policy. But I believe that that's probably the one, and we've got some strategies around that as well. You're welcome.
Moss.
Thanks. So it sounds like, with similar things, there's some policies that are being put in place that I know CAC members worked really hard to present to the board. Could you provide an update of when PAG RTA is going to address the regional concerns about the board's unrepresentative voting structure? Because I know that that's a big piece of, you can pass policies, but if the board changes, they can change those policies without going to the voters.
Mr. Chairman, Moss. So we are not addressing the voting structure as a part of the review of the admin code or the policies. We as staff are not. I know that at least one board member, maybe two, are interested in that, and they're having conversations around that. And that could be a conversation that happens going forward. What I will tell you is part of the review is how we structure the citizens accountability for regional transportation, the CART. And the voting structure there is really what I'm thinking will probably change. And I'm really thinking about the structure of that group as a whole, the number of folks. Currently, it's a very large group, and it's difficult to get a quorum. But the way that I'm really proposing it is that ultimately the RTA board would make the final decisions with recommendations from that citizens oversight, and really pushing ultimately that responsibility on the RTA board. And so the voting structure of that board is something that they'll have to decide on down the road.
Kevin and then Bruce.
Two quick questions on the, everything shown in 2026.
Mr. Chair, that's correct, Helen.
Second question is, potential additional revenue. Does that take it to like optimistic projection or baseline?
Mr. Chairman, Kevin, actually, the way we came up with it was what it would take. And one thing I didn't talk about was the percentages for the jurisdictions. The dollars are distributed, those potential additional revenue dollars are distributed 75% to the city of Tucson projects and 25% to everyone else until the city reaches 55%. So the city's current number is like 51.3%. And with the additional revenue, those dollars would go to the city at 75%, up to 55%. You asked about the 2000s or the 2026 dollars. All of it is in 2026 dollars. Part of what we're looking at in the admin code is how we inflate those, GDP or CPI. And we're going back and forth. At this point, it seems like we're landing on GDP. And the idea there is on an annual basis, I mentioned, we check on projected or inflated revenue against inflated cost. But the costs are not a snapshot of that year. They're through the end of the program. And so that way, every year we're projecting out through the end of the program.
Bruce.
Mike, as Moss indicated, the CAC had a series of policy recommendations. I think you did a really good job of addressing the conservative estimates, and that was consistent with the CAC and the governing structure. The other one was the notion of a 10-year review that would allow for a modification in the plan if transportation demand changed or a project was not needed, and how you could move forward with that without having to go back to the voters for additional approval. Is that addressed in this plan?
So, Mr. Chairman, Bruce, thank you. So if you look at the sheet, the project sheet, note number 2 really gives the flexibility to the RTA board should unforeseen conditions. Sorry for making the small print. It's kind of the fine print of the plan. But it really gives an opportunity for the RTA board to make modifications within the elements over the course of the program. However, one of the things that I really suggested we focus on is how do we, on a quarterly basis, update the board, as Kevin mentioned earlier, so that they know where we're headed and what's going on. Now, one of the things that you may have heard in some of the deliberations, some of the conversations, the board can take the plan back for an amendment after the fourth year and before the last 2 years. So at any time within that time frame, there's an opportunity to go back and have a conversation with the voter. My suggestion is going to be that as a part of the annual audit and annual review, when we're projecting out, and again, it's important to look at it not just as a snapshot to that point, but all the way to the end of the program. And if it looks like there needs to be a conversation with the voter, we should be able to do that. And we should know that within probably the 6th to 8th year. So all of a sudden, when it gets close to that 10-year mark, we're able to have a conversation. And that conversation, quite frankly, is probably with the voter if it doesn't look good.
One of the issues was that I think the committee supported the notion of flexibility, but if you gave the board the ability to make modification, that there be some kind of a citizen advisory input process as part of that, short of going to the voters themselves. And I don't know if that's been addressed or not.
Mr. Chairman, it has not been addressed. It's a great point. I had not thought of that. I appreciate that. We'll certainly look at incorporating that as a part of the policies going forward. I like that.
Yeah, I know the board had discussed that nuance of or detail of that sort of a proposed process, but didn't from my remembrance of it, hadn't come to a conclusion about it. And partly, I think that was because each of the jurisdictions kind of has its own public participation ethos, if you will, and I think each of them anticipates continuing to use that or even beef that up. But whether it's been put to paper as part of the promise to the voters, I don't think that's happened yet. And I do think it's a great point to continue to discuss before March.
Mr. Chairman, just so you all know, there's a countdown timer on the wall up here, and that is March 10th at 8 p.m. Because that's when the results are known. I like clarity of focus. And there's two. There's one in this room and there's one out when you get off the elevator on the fourth floor right above the entrance. So I like clarity of focus. So I just want everybody to know it's all hands on deck to make sure that these types of conversations we incorporate and we bring back and make sure that we're honed in on a great solution. You have a question?
Yes, thank you. Looking at the descriptions of the 1 or 1 and 1B, can you tell me what makes the difference between a multimodal and a new? Because there seems to be multimodal in the new, but it's not called multimodal. I recall that the city had suggested that all of their roads were being road improvements based on multimodal and modernization. So why is this one called multimodal and this isn't called multimodal, I guess? And this is how it's going to show on the ballot, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, first vice chair. Check. I just want to make sure I get the titles right here. So actually, it's intended to be multimodal for the entirety of one. So if you look, it's one, and if you think of it, it's like 1A. That's the entire element. That's all. But it's all multimodal.
Okay. So it should be labeled not a blue as 1B. It should be 1A and 1B and white, but whatever.
We wanted to make sure there was clarity on RTA 1 versus RTA next, and that's why we did both of them in blue. But it's a good point. I hadn't really caught that.
Yeah, well, it is confusing the way it's set out, I think, even though you have project modifications, completion. But okay, thank you.
All right. Karen, did you have a comment or question?
So I don't see Norte Sur on here anymore. Was it just renamed as the high capacity transit? And if so, are we including the Sixth Avenue portion of it as well? And then I have a second question.
Let's start that response and then I'll have the staff address it as well. So during the evolution of the plan, the city asked to change that and make it more generic to just high capacity transit improvement. That was the request that was made early on. And so we just made that change. I don't know about the limits of that or if that's been decided upon. Does somebody know that?
That's correct, Mr. Chair and Karen. That's in addition to that, then they also prioritize the northern piece of that effort so that that would move forward and be included with the funding allocations because they felt that was further advanced.
So Sixth Avenue is not on here.
At this time, no.
Okay, thank you. Second question. Is the CART fully represented right now?
Mr. Chair, Karen, I believe there's one vacancy as I recall.
Do you know what region that is or what area that is?
I believe it is Saurita.
Moss.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the transit numbers were put together. I was reading RMAP just casually one morning and I think that was adopted or drafted before this plan was finalized. And there's an entire special section that focuses on the regional challenges funding transit for the next 20 to 30 years. And I think when I did the math, it sounds like we need like 3 billion in the next 20 years. And what this does is about a quarter of that, less than a quarter of that. So there's that piece. And then an RMAP, it also says that, in addition to the continuing challenge that the region is facing to provide for transit services, the shortfall is often made up by the Tucson General Fund contributions, which is already the largest single source of transit funding in the region. Since you were the former city manager, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, if you had any idea about how much of the regional transit shortfall is currently being covered by the city's general fund, and also why this plan only has 27% going to it and only a fraction of what the regional need, since RTA is only required by state legislature or the ARS to provide transit service.
So Mr. Chairman, I don't know the exact numbers today. I know that the city's general fund contribution is in the $60 million range. I don't know that exactly, but it's in that ballpark, at least it was. The one thing I would suggest to you is the RTA Next plan includes $726 million, but when you add the additional $158 million, it's close to $1 billion. It's about $900 million. So it's closer to a third of the total shortfall of that $3 billion. I can't tell you exactly how all of this came about because I wasn't part of that. That's not an excuse. It's just I don't know. I can turn it over to the staff and ask them to maybe weigh in on that if you'd like. Preston, or you have?
I can provide a little bit more clarity. When these numbers were created, I wasn't directly involved, but I did, I guess, provide some input. Just going down the list with 46, the high capacity, that's specifically what the city requested for the north portion of the BRT line that they're wanting to build out with that $70 million and then the $70 million matching FTA grant funding. Streetcar operations, from what I've heard, that $40 million is a result of a continuation of operational funding for the streetcar that was originally promised with the RTA 1 plan. So it's just a continuation of that RTA funding going to streetcar operations. A lot of this is just to continue the existing transit operations that the RTA funds right now currently. There is, I think, maybe don't quote me on these percentages, but about 80% of the transit funding that's in this plan will go to the continuation of the existing transit services that the RTA supplements and funds and provides. And that includes those two slides, the paratransit, the Sun Shuttle services that the RTA provides directly and oversees directly, and then, you know, the other 60% of annual funding that goes, RTA funding that goes to transit, goes to those SunTrans service enhancements, expanded service hours, frequencies, weekend service, et cetera. And then there's going to be about roughly 20% that goes beyond what we're currently providing now. And that's what's going to be the decision of the jurisdictions to decide how they want to spend that additional 20, you know, I don't know the exact number, but maybe 115, $200 million over the next 20 years, where they want to place that to expand the already expanded services that the RTA 1 provides. Going down the list, yeah. So, I mean, that kind of covers sub-elements 48, 49, 50. Those are all continuations. Basically, most of that funding is going to go to the continuation. We calculated how much it costs over a 20-year period to still provide the services we're providing now, and then adding a little bit more on top of that. The safety and security of the region, the regional transit system, that's a new sub-element. $51 million was allotted to that. I don't remember the exact methodology on how we got to that 51 million. I don't know if anyone else here has more explanation on that one.
So part of the conversation here, I think, Mr. Chairman Moss, I think part of the conversation was how the entirety of the program would shake out in terms of the percentages for the jurisdictions as well. And I think that 51% was added at the very end to help with the percentages, particularly for the city of Tucson.
So just to make sure I heard right, so based on kind of rough estimates, you know, city's general fund is paying about $60 million annually to fund regional transit service, which is about double what the RTA would put towards it. Because I think right now it's like 30 million that the RTA contributes.
Mr. Chair, that's not what I intended to say. So let me make sure we're clear. The city put $60 million towards the transit system, not necessarily the regional transit. And so I think it's predominantly focused on the urban core. What we've talked about, and I think the differentiation is that the RTA right now today funds about 32 million, which is partly some of the fixed routes and some of the expanded routes, as well as the paratransit dollar ride. And so those are separate. They're very related, obviously, but they're separate. And so I don't believe that the city's 60 million is for the regional transit system. It's just for the urban core transit system.
Got it. That's really helpful. And then just one other kind of clarification, because there's you mentioned it with like the pavement rehab, and then, you know, some of this with how, you know, we see bus frequency route expansion, very general. We know that I understand why that is, and that's fine. I guess, you know, as we all have our own probably forms of trauma about the last 7 years with this process. And I think some, you know, just concerns, and Mike, you were very good at, I think, talking to the board about the trust that RTA needs to rebuild with the region. And that's why I put forward that 10-year plan. And I guess kind of related to that, you know, I hear, oh, you know, this much is going to get spent with the city, but, you know, for pavement rehab, for transit. My concern is that none of that's written onto the ballot language, and what we were told for the past 20 years is if it's not written there, you know, it's fungible. It can get swept. We saw it get swept into other categories. And I know that there's the check-in processes, but then all of this still dials back into the concern about what is the accountability? Will that accountability be actually honored in the future? And how can we, just make sure that the plan and the community are truly brought along and have input, and that's listened to and act upon in the future?
Mr. Chairman, Moss, thank you for that, because I think you're hitting on the core of what we've tried to do over the last few months, and that is to truly develop the systems. And one of the commitments, so you may have heard, I was appointed as an interim director, and then they changed that to permanent director. But what I suggested to the board was that my focus and my mission is not necessarily that countdown clock and making sure that it passes. That'd be great. But it's really about almost exactly what you said, Moss, which is how do we memorialize and develop the systems internally that are ironclad, or as ironclad as we can. Now, I can tell you that we've struggled with how much flexibility to build in, but yet not too much flexibility. It looks like it's a slush fund and that there's a lot of, that people can do whatever they want. That's not good. That's not good business. That's not good for voter confidence. And so what I've challenged the staff to do, and what we're working on right now, are the admin code and policies that are going to basically provide that framework. Now, I can't with absolute confidence tell you that it will never change or it can't change. But what I can tell you is that when we're finished, I think we're going to have a pretty strong process for that accountability. And that I am confident in. Now, I can also tell you if they decide to change that down the road, then I'll come to call to the audience and raise some cane about that. But I can assure you that it's not lost. It's not lost on me in terms of that concern. And I've expressed that to the board, and I've been very open with them. I think those of you who know me, I'm very direct and very open. And I've said to them, we have to figure out how to do this, but not complicate the ballot such that it becomes an impediment, if you will. However, we really struggled with that language, that note number 2. I don't mind telling you, we struggled because we wanted to give the board some flexibility so that we don't, it's not so tight that we have no flexibility. But yet, how can we do it with this, kind of a check and balance so that we're able to do business, if you will, and still do the right thing for the region, that obviously the spirit and intent of the voter is ultimately carried forward. That's really been the spirit that we've been trying to go forward.
Eva?
I really appreciate all of the work, the growth, the intentionality that I see in this process. And I just want to say that first. Now I'm going to ask a question that might not feel so great to hear, which is, if the voters reject this, what are next steps?
So I would like to suggest that I haven't thought about that, but that would be untrue. So we have a couple of things. First of all, I see it as two different things that are going to happen. One of them is one of the slides outlined, the transit operations will see a significant hit. Okay. The ones that will, the service that will suffer the most immediately will be the paratransit and dial ride. And you saw from Preston's map that blue area is going to be the first one to hit. Now, keep in mind that isn't just the blue area, though. That purple area, that urban core will also suffer as well, because even though there's a mandate to provide some of those services within that core, it's not to the level that we, because there's additional dollars going there, those go away. There's going to be an impact there. So that's number one. I think over time, there will be a further deterioration of our infrastructure, of our roadways. Congestion will get worse. Commute times will get worse. And it will be something that could affect, and in my opinion, will affect the economy as a whole. You saw the impact. Now, what's the fallback plan? Okay, I understand. I'm getting to that. So what's the fallback plan? Obviously, if we are not successful in March, I would recommend to the board we go immediately in November, and we have a conversation with the voter in November, because the longer we wait, the bigger the gap is. Now, I can tell you there's not a lot of time. So if you do the math for a November election, You almost have to have everything done by March May or June, right? And all of a sudden, it's like you have no time to rethink, the plan or rethink or go back and analyze what the concerns were of the voter. Now, keep in mind that even if a November election occurs and we're successful there, the dollars don't start coming in until April 1. And that really is the tough part, because now we're a full year of impact, if you will. The roads aren't going to fall apart in a year, but the transit will be significantly impacted, in my opinion.
I think it's too late for that already, because a lot of those same roads have already fallen apart. Sorry, that was editorial.
I do have a follow-up question. You said that if it failed, there would be a conversation with the voters. What does that conversation look like?
When I say conversation with the voter, what I'm talking about is we go back to the voter. We take a plan back to the voter and say, okay, here's another plan. What is, does this look better?
Could you talk a little bit more about, like, how would we come up with a different plan? How would we go back to the voter? What do those communications look like?
I can't right this second because I don't know. I can tell you that as we have looked at this, all our eggs are in this basket. And if we're not successful, then we'll rethink it on March 11th. And there is, like I said, there is really no time or very little time from what the deadlines are. And I don't know the exact deadlines, but I'm pretty sure they're usually around June, maybe July at the latest, for the ballot language to be ready for a November election.
So you might be able to read it between the lines of my questions. What if we actually did some of these things now, right? Because I'm thinking about 414, I'm thinking about Project Blue, I'm thinking about how much effort is going into this right now and how terrible that pivot will have to be if the voters reject this. So I, as a CAC member, am bringing that voice into the conversation, right? I just read that the coral reefs have hit a tipping point. The coral reefs sustain a quarter of marine life. It's one of the first, environmental impacts that were beyond repair, right? So with those kinds of headlines increasingly, inundating us, how is the voter going to receive this plan? That's what I'm asking myself as I sit through this meeting.
Chair, thank you. I appreciate that.
Can I
Very good.
just clarify too, jurisdictions have taxing power and they could, fill the transit gap that you were referencing, correct?
Mr. Chair, Moss, I'm going to say all, but I'm not positive about all, but most jurisdictions have taxing authority to do some of that. What I would caution, though, is something that we just really dissected the other day. We heard that one of the municipalities, not Tucson, was thinking about doing their own half cent sales tax should this fail, so that they could address and shore up some of their needs, particularly their transit needs. My nervousness there is the economies of scale they're going to be lost. And what I'm concerned with is if there is an allocation, if you will, today of paratransit and dial ride for a community, and say it's $2 million or $3 million, and they're able to get that from another source, they can't provide the same service for those dollars. The dollars would be increased because they would not have that economy of scale for all of the administrative pieces, all of the maintenance pieces that currently go into the system. And so that's what makes me nervous. So yes, they could shore that up temporarily, potentially, but I'm nervous about that as a solution that people are going to be talking about, because I don't know that it's entirely accurate. It's my nervousness.
They couldn't, so like, for example, if Oro Valley passed a half cent sales tax to ensure that they have a dial ride service, they couldn't funnel that or coordinate with do like a IGA with Tucson to avoid some of those admin overhead things that you're referencing?
Mr. Chair, of course, that's an option. What I was really referring to is the macro level system as a whole. And so the component parts are not going to add up to the same 30 million. I think it's going to be more than that if they're all individual. And so if there is an opportunity, which I'm sure there would be for IGAs or for some type of relationship, absolutely, that could reduce some of those costs. But I don't think it's going to be a one-for-one is my gut. It's just based on looking at the whole system. And certainly when you delve into the detail, I think it could be close, but I'm not sure it's going to be one-to-one.
Bruce?
Mr. Chairman, Mike, towards the end of the CAC process, several of us, it was not unanimous among the committee, really got focused on this whole notion of high capacity transit, and that it represents an important paradigm shift in how we try to move people around the region going into the future, particularly trying to move people from work to home to major activity centers. One of the reasons that I challenged the forecast model being conservative, because I believe the midline is a much more realistic forecast, was the notion that there may be additional monies that could be dedicated to addressing that paradigm change. There's only 70 million in this plus a matching grant, and that only builds a portion of what the city had proposed. And that's why I think that in looking at how you allocate those additional revenues that might come in, we had flirted with the notion of recommending that a disproportionate amount of those revenues be dedicated to moving towards this transit model, which many other cities have now successfully moved to. So it's not a question, it's just a comment on my part. But I do think it's an important issue, and I don't know if it's been finally resolved by the board or not. But as they say, them's my comments. If you don't like them, I'll change them. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, since that wasn't a question, I won't answer it, but I will suggest to you that and I guess I'll look at it as risk, the risk of the plan and back to Eva's point, the risk of, just our world, right? I think that those conversations are going to evolve. And I think that what we've tried to do is build in at least some nimbleness in the plan to give us an opportunity to do that. And when you start looking at, and I don't know that I answered Kevin's entire question, but that 352 potential additional revenue gets it right up close to the baseline. So it goes from pessimistic to baseline. I don't think I said that to you. But when you look at the dollars that are coming in, I think that we have to, at least annually, but I'm hoping even quarterly, run those numbers so that we have a good handle on what's happening. And then it gives us the flexibility. And in my opinion, the success moving forward, which is some of the things you just outlined, is that flexibility. Just we got to make sure that we have those projections and we know we can make decisions. The board can make decisions that are based on those projections going forward, which traditionally they may not have had that type of information available to them, at least in a format that they could react to it.
And I think just to piggyback on that, when we did have that information available, the community didn't act on that. And so, by 2009, we realized there was going to be a large reduction in the estimated or in the promised, if you will, revenues for the 20-year period. And we didn't really at that point do much more than hope, I guess, that, a rising tide would somehow refill the coffers. And I think by the time we got to the point as a community where we realized that we weren't actually going to be able to finish them all, we really at that point needed a timeout and probably to go back to the voters and say, what do we do? Here's what we think we could do. Do you agree? And that's from me. That's not from any official source. That's just my take on it. Having been a CAC member for RTA 1 as well as slogging through this process here and watching the community try to come up with a plan and its own priorities, as well as decide how much revenue we should anticipate and how we can deal with the kinds of issues that we unfortunately have had to deal with for the first 20-year period. So with that, I would like to close our meeting and give my own thanks to the committee. I know I thanked you, I hope, several times before we completed our work and toward the end of it. But as we're heading into the campaign for this project, for this this measure, I wanted to thank everyone individually. Those of you who haven't been here, you know, in person and yet have been full members of this committee online and however else you could connect. I appreciate it. The support you gave for Carolyn, Mary, and I was tremendous, and you were engaged, and you were intelligent, and you were passionate. And I don't think that a governing board could appreciate anything less than that and could expect anything more than we did give them. So as I adjourn the meeting and give Mel one last word, I wanted to see if everyone could stick around for just a minute and see if we could all gather together and get a picture, if that's okay with everyone. Mel, close us out.
Question is, I appreciate that you added in the pavement rehabilitation. It's very important. Where'd the money come from? Was that just an added fund that we never saw? And I'm just not figuring out, I don't understand that.
Mr. Chair, the total was the 2.67. I think when you all were looking at this over the course of many years, it was about 2.48, I think was the 2.34 was the number. Okay, so as we went through and refined some of the numbers and looked at, and quite frankly, updated the projections, some of the projections that you all were using, even in those early years, we were far exceeding the actual revenues were coming in greater. So what we in essence did was just took a straight line until it hit the curve, basically. And the new number is 2.67. So that's where some of those dollars came from.
And then if I could give one comment, for this map is less than overwhelming for 2.6 billion. Are all the roads, are all the projects that are in here?
No,
No.
a lot of that's just the road projects, the safety and a lot of those elements we can't map because the specific projects haven't been defined. So that's just one element.
Just as a marketing piece, it needs to show more. The colors.
Very good. All right.
If I could have.
Thanks, everyone.
Is it going to be used to promote the plan, or is it just more commemorate this committee?
We won't use it to promote. It's really just commemorate. It's just, you all put a lot of time together and put a lot of energy and effort in this. It's just a commemoration. That's all.
If I could just add quickly too, everyone should have my email. I think I emailed you all. We're trying to get out and just educate the public right now about what the RTA is and the projects that are in the plan. So we're presenting at any professional network that you might be a part of, neighborhood associations. No group is too small. So if there's a group where you would like us to come speak and just share information about the RTA, we're more than happy to do that. Just please email me.
Very good.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike and the staff. Really appreciate it. And we are adjourned.
I need to.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask her where.